So whenever, yeah, so whenever we are going to do this database testing, this includes different things, right? So database testing includes different things. One is about schema, right? So schemas will be implemented. At the same time, we create some database tables because this is where I told you, right? So database tables are required. So the database tables are required to store the data because we are using point of sale system. For what purpose it was customer came, we build the products. So whenever we entered name of the customer there, so it has to store in the name column. Gender, for example, right? There is an option called gender, Mr. or Mrs. MRS, right? So or Miss, it can be. That is a specific gender. This is what we call it as suffix. Suffix we call it as. It's called a suffix. Next, mailing address or contact details or the list of products what they have purchased, date when they have done the transaction, right? So all these things will have a different columns. This is where generally database tables will be created. Table will be created. In that we need to add columns also. So columns also there, right? Columns will also be there. Next, keys and as well as indexes. What are the different keys are we using when we are working on the data? So different keys will be there. So that is also needed. Next is stored procedures. Means what are the storage procedures do we follow and how are we storing the data? Because why storage of data is required? Because we want to retrieve the data from the database. If you want to retrieve the data from the database, we must be knowing about how to store the data, and whatever the data to be stored and all everything is what we must be knowing. So followed by this, we need to know the triggers, right? So what are the trigger points and all triggering points that we have to be tested even, right? That also we have to test. At the same time, database server validations. Database server validations means if, for example, there is a database we have created, which is called as a server that has to be validated, right? To what extent the database has been created, we have to validate, right? So database server validations and all everything we do. This is where generally database server validations are being used. So store procedures are separate, triggers that is as separate, database server validations, those are as separate. At the same time, we need to validate, right? So validating the data duplication. Because sometimes due to misignorance, right? So it is not by intention. Sometimes there will be a data which has stored uh, multiple times the same number or same person details were added, for example. So this is where generally this we have to cross check. We have to cross check and verify whether is there any duplication of data was included in it, right? So if you want to then how to identify this and whatever the duplications we have created that has to be removed from the database. So for that validating the data duplication we have to do. Sometimes usually it happens when we are storing the data. There are possibilities. I don't say that will happen, but there are possibilities. Sometimes it will be added. So we need to do data validating the data duplications and all everything is what we have to do. This is where generally database testing means if you want to do testing for any of the databases. So what are all the testing we have to do for the database is for this. One is about schema we have to test for. At the same time, we need to test the data tables. We need to test the columns. We need to test the key indexes, all that, keys and indexes. Next is we need to know about the stored procedures. What are the different stored procedures are we using that we have to be known with. At the same time, we must be knowing about the triggers, trigger points, what we have to be used for. At the same time, database server validations, next validating data duplications. All these things are the one which will be used to do the testing. Means if you want to do database testing and all, these points we have to be included. Now, when it comes to types of database testing, right? So what are the different type of database testings we have? Right. So what are the includes, right? So what are the different types of database testings we have? Normally, type of database testings are considered and as less calculated or divided into three different parts. One is structural testing. Yeah. So one is we call it as structural testing. Second one is called functional testing. Third one is called non-functional testing, right? So structural testing, functional testing, and non-functional testing. Structural testing means we want to test the structure of the database. Means structure of the database must be strong such a way so that whatever the storage of data are we managing and how are we retrieving the data, knowing about the storage procedures, etc., how the storage procedures has to be created. So the structure of the data must be strong in such a way so that there won't be any kind of data loss or something. There is no possibility. We have to reduce the complexity of data loss and something of that sort, right? All these things we have to do. This is where generally we call it as structural testing stands for.